Hi, Kimberly. How are you? My name is Whitney Mélinard, and I am an Indigenous rights, social, and climate justice advocate and the CEO of my foundation in the Commonwealth of Dominica. I am here as a delegate of Island Innovation through the Caribbean Climate Justice Leaders Academy, and I'm also party delegate from my country. So, as way of background, the Virtual Ocean Pavilion is a free online platform dedicated to raising the visibility of the ocean and showcasing why the ocean matters in climate negotiations and really to all life on our planet. The aim of the VOP is to democratize the ocean at COPs and to promote unity and inclusivity whilst increasing knowledge and commitment and action for the ocean climate nexus at key events such as this UNFCCC COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. So why we're having this interview, the Virtual Ocean Pavilion aims to provide attendees with a better insight on COP29, the discussion process, the status, to really let attendees know what to expect and what is going on at this climate conference. So thank you for taking out the time from your day. I know that COP is extremely busy. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to do. So thank you so much for taking out the time to be here with me. And could you please say your name, your affiliation, and your role here at COP29?
Sure thing. Really nice to meet you, Whitney, and thanks for having me. It's actually really refreshing to do a virtual event, when I'm used to just the buzz and craziness of being at the pavilions. So a little background on me, I'm Kim Myers. I work at the Nature Conservancy, which is a global nonprofit organization that works in all manners of nature-related work. We work in lots of different ecosystems all over the world, around 80 countries, doing conservation, restoration. We work in food. So our breadth is really wide here, and we have a lot of strong interest in advocating for nature at COP29. So we're obviously not parties in the negotiations here. We don't represent governments and we don't negotiate any texts, but I come to COP as an observer, trying to represent the civil society voice really on nature as part of the climate solution. There's no doubt that it's a critical piece. And there's many other, crises alongside climate, obviously the biodiversity crisis that we want to make sure is being addressed in tandem. So we have many people here at COP with our delegation working on agriculture, water issues, biodiversity, tracking adaptation, all in the interest of really advancing nature as a climate solution. And me individually, I'm really focused around a particular part of the Paris Agreement called Article 6, which is the market-based mechanism in the Paris Agreement and is really aimed at accelerating finance and hopefully, if all goes well, it will help kind of unlock a lot of new key finance for natural climate solutions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So we're gonna head right into it if that's okay with you. It would be helpful, I believe, to start off with an explanation for the youth about where parties currently stand with negotiations and some major items relating to the ocean that party negotiations are deciding on. So you mentioned Article 6, and the last time that I was in the negotiation room with regards to the Paris Agreement, I believe they were on Article 6, point 2. So if you could let us know what is going on as of right now.
Yeah, it's a big, complicated topic, but happy to kind of give a quick crash course on what Article 6 is and kind of where it stands in terms of the text. So, as part of the traditional NDCs, countries are reducing emissions domestically, right? And Article 6 is kind of this interesting sidecar to NDCs that says countries can actually trade those emissions reductions that they achieve domestically. So if we take country A, for example, and say country A has surpassed its national target, it can say like, yes, we achieved our 2030 goal. And actually, to get more finance, they can sell those excess emission reductions onto country B, who may not be able to reach its national target for various reasons around maybe really expensive marginal abatement of reductions, or, not slow advancements in technology that haven't allowed them to really decarbonize at the rate that they were hoping for their NDC. So, once country B claims those reductions, they actually claim it as their own NDC reductions, and country A has to subtract those from their own accounting. And like I say, country A would want to do this because they're getting finance in exchange for trading those emissions reductions, and that oftentimes will get used for things like climate adaptation, sustainable development in the country. It kind of circulates back into the economy and does more good things for the climate. So people often refer to this piece of the Paris Agreement as the Article 6 market, because that's really what it is. It's, not the traditional like consumer to retailer kind of market system, but it's country to country. Countries are buying and selling mitigation outcomes as a sort of marketplace. And you mentioned 6.2. There's kind of two key pieces that are getting negotiated now within Article 6. 6.2 is one of them, and the other is 6.4. So these are kind of like the market-based options within Article 6 that countries can kind of choose which one they want to use when they do a trade with another country. So under 6.2, you can kind of think about it as like the high flexibility option. Countries will go to the buyer of their units and say, like, what are we going to trade? How many units, and like what standard are we going to use, and like how are we going to design the registry to like record and capture all the information on the units that we're selling. So it's really bespoke. It's kind of like you're making your cake from scratch, right? And then under 6.4, it's low flexibility, but you have a lot of technical capacity coming through the UNFCCC that makes it a lower lift for countries to not have to make as many decisions, really, right? So they'll still partner with another country and say, okay, we're going to trade units together, but they don't really have to talk about what methodology they're going to use and where the credits are going to sit on a registry. All of that is kind of pre-designed by the UNFCCC. So it's like akin to baking a cake at the store. So that's 6.2 and 6.4 in a nutshell. And where this brings in nature is that, the UNFCCC has broadly defined what kind of activities are tradable under 6.2 or 6.4. And that can include any activity that involves reducing planned emissions, or also removing emissions that have already been emitted into the atmosphere. So we just call these reductions or removals. These are the types of activities that are eligible. So you can imagine, nature-based projects can easily fit into those categories. So if we're talking about like ocean ecosystems, that could include something like restoring tidal seagrass, or conserving mangrove ecosystems. These things are all fair game for trading under Article 6. And where things are at the negotiations coming into COP29. So long introduction, but I think it's important to kind of set that groundwork. We know that nature is 100% going to be eligible under 6.2 because countries really can do whatever they want. There's kind of like some basic principles around, we want to make sure that the reductions are going to be permanent and additional, and all these technical terms to ensure that they're high quality, but that interpretation of what those terms mean is really up to the countries. So in that sense, 6.2 is a done deal for nature, which is great news. But for 6.4, we're in a much more uncertain situation. Nature hasn't been ruled out, but it also hasn't been, we don't know, which specific nature-based activities are going to be ruled in because they haven't actually selected which methodologies are going to be included under the 6.4 mechanism. So 6.2 and 6.4 are just really at totally different stages of negotiation. And actually under 6.2, we've already seen some countries signing bilateral agreements and regulating their market to be able to trade. And there's been one trade already under 6.2, which is very exciting. But there are still some technical issues that are under discussion that negotiators are continuing here in Baku. So those go on, but they're not really inhibiting the market from operating. But 6.4 is just totally inoperable at this point because, again, there's just no credits to trade at this point. The process has been very long. All the parties need to agree unilaterally on which methodologies are going to be allowable. So this takes a very long political process to get everyone to kind of agree what those activities are going to be. So that's where my eyes are mostly when I'm watching these negotiations is 6.4 and what could or could not be included.
Thank you so much. I really hope that come Friday, Thursday, towards the end of this week, as COP ends this week, that we have some progress and we get some good news very soon. So I know you probably get this question a lot, but what are your expectations coming out of COP? And what would you consider a success for oceans among the COP29 outcomes? Outside of obviously getting some really good news on Article 6.4.
Yeah. I mean, my attention is really focused around Article 6. So from that perspective, it would be a huge win if we can get some new finalized text because that's been a very challenging outcome. It sounds like a very simple thing, right? To agree to something at every COP, but actually in the past 2 years, negotiators have not been prior to COP to kind of like arrange draft texts and they actually managed to come up with a final draft of some really key text around how 6.4 was going to be developed and how methodologies were going to be assessed. And they actually managed to get that approved by all the parties on day one. So that was a great, kind of win and signal that they want to move things forward. And yeah, so for now, what's happening with Article 6 is really thinking more deeply about the specific steps in the trading process. There's like a long sequence of steps that are involved in transferring emission reductions from one country to another. And also many reporting requirements. These are the very like technical nitty-gritty details that maybe don't make a big splash in the news, but are really important to making sure that, Article 6 is working and that there's good transparency and integrity there. And I think that's my biggest hope is just like getting more political certainty. These decisions might not change the market so much because I think countries kind of already have a good sense of what to do. But once you get that political certainty, I think it allows them to kind of move even faster because the investors that they're working with or the private sector can feel more confident getting involved and, things can start to be written into the law, which makes makes movement a lot easier because you have, less political risk going on. So yeah, those are kind of where I'm sitting and hoping things are going well. It started off on a really good point. It's been a bit slow the past week and a half. Not much new text coming out, but again, still hopeful for Thursday to see something come together.
Yes, yes, we do need political certainty across the board, and that is in our favor. So what do you believe, what kind of collaboration is needed with or among or whom in order to make this happen? Um, Article 6, whether it's 6.4, what kind of collaboration is needed to really make it happen, to have change that our countries can really progress? Um, and what would be the best alternative to your desired outcome for the ocean?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the most interesting collaborations that are happening in Article 6 right now are actually outside of the negotiation rooms. Because like I say, Article 6 can be operationalized in certain contexts. We are seeing a lot of kind of bilateral interactions between countries. A lot of them have already signed agreements saying, yes, we want to trade together. And some countries have already kind of figured out which projects they're going to be transferring over to their buyer country. So those negotiations are really critical in kind of sending us an early signal on how deals are getting structured and what kind of units, buyers are interested in, because that's, I think, really important for us to understand what the role of nature is going to be, is what does the demand look like from countries? And so far, a lot of the early types of projects that have been authorized for trade under Article 6, some of them have been relating to nature, but a lot of them are more relating to industry, energy efficiency, clean cook stoves. So we still have a bit of uncertainty, I think, around how countries are feeling about purchasing kind of nature related credits. But then there's also that country to country collaboration, really key. We're keeping an eye on that. The other side is the private sector side. Obviously countries are not going to be developing projects and running this entire market domestically by themselves. A lot of them are working with capacity building facilities. Some of them are actually funded by buyer countries, but others are, consultancies that come in and really help countries design really clear market rules. Because again, with this political uncertainty with the negotiating text and just the sheer complexity of this Article 6 market and how it's designed, it is really challenging to understand how to regulate Article 6 well. It's like this whole new world that countries are figuring out. So the private sector is really critical in, kind of helping countries navigate those really challenging technical decisions and political decisions. And then, of course, on the private sector side, we're seeing companies that are actually doing the work to develop projects. That's kind of how carbon markets work, right? They go in and you get a private developer to, focus on a certain area of land that's going to plant trees or restore seagrass, etc. And these players are really key in making sure that there are actual emission reductions that can be traded. So, governments are really working closely with them to say, okay, this is the process that we're thinking to bring the unit from, issuance to retirement in the buyer country. And I think it's really important for them to work with the private sector there to make sure that the functionality is there, and it, like, the process isn't so bureaucratic that these project developers really just can't operate. So I think that's a really important connection point there. And then the last point I'll say, because when we're talking about nature, most of the time we're talking about Indigenous people and local communities who are, like, going in and doing the implementation, and doing the hard work to get these results. So it's really critical, I think, if we want a high integrity market that's equitable and works well, to build these safeguards into Article 6 projects, and consulting and ensuring that, Indigenous peoples and local communities are properly consulted. When a project gets developed, they're included in the design process. And a lot of governments have already started to regulate these things as a requirement. Negotiations have been talking about this as well, requiring these in the projects. And yeah, it's so critical, not just, in terms of making sure that the project continues to run. Your stakeholders are incentivized to keep doing the mitigation activities, but it's just a question of human rights, like, if we're not properly including these really key actors in this market, then we just have, we're doing the opposite of what we're intending to do here, which is, like, support sustainable development and climate change simultaneously through natural climate solutions.
Thank you so much for including that last part. I was just about to go there. As you were speaking about nature-based solutions, I was about to ask about where are we in including Indigenous peoples' perspectives, knowledge, and traditions in Article 6 regarding the ocean. So thank you very much for that. To hear as an Indigenous youth that we are being included and progress is being made to include Indigenous peoples in these processes. So thank you so very much. So next question, in addition to the NDCs and the NAPs, how can countries best leverage existing processes and action to strengthen ocean-based climate action?
Of course, I'm going to dive into carbon markets here because that's my role. I'm advocating for that inclusion. I think it's a really important lever that countries need to pull to, achieve additional emissions reductions that they wouldn't normally, be able to achieve just using their own domestic finance, or, receiving finance for activities that, are just too expensive to abate domestically. I wouldn't dare say that carbon markets are this kind of one size fits all solution, but I think they're a really critical tool in the toolbox to accelerate action. So, for example, many of the technologies that we need to decarbonize economies are either they don't exist yet, they're still in research and development, or they're just too expensive today. And so if we just rely on what happens within countries' borders and is affordable, then we're really risking missing the Paris goals of 1.5 and more likely 2 degrees at this point. So this is why I think international cooperation is just so important, because it actually helps us go further by having countries that can afford to pay for that lower cost mitigation internationally to kind of access those opportunities and mobilize that finance. So, what might be expensive for one country to mitigate, too expensive for, Sierra Leone to implement a mangrove restoration project, for example, at $20 a ton. This type of intervention might be something that's, easily achievable for Canada to finance and come in. So this is the type of intervention that you just might not be able to see if you don't have these types of international cooperations, allowing action beyond just the country's NDC to happen.
Thank you. So now I'm going to ask you, how can we incentivize nature-based solutions, recognizing that climate and biodiversity crisis are deeply intertwined? And I'm going to throw in there as well the indigenous perspectives and indigenous challenges with land rights and the challenges that indigenous peoples face. I think all of these three are so very much intertwined. So how then can we incentivize nature-based solutions?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just an objective truth that we need nature to, achieve our Paris Agreement goals. TNC actually did a study in a few years back that found that among the solutions for cost-effective mitigation by 2030, nature actually represents 30%. So it's just like an opportunity that we can't afford to miss. I think a lot of countries recognize that fact, but there's different kind of appetites for the approaches that we take to finance it. And maybe, those hesitancies are really the bottleneck. So a lot of the hesitancy around natural climate solutions, just especially in carbon market context, comes from kind of the uncertainty behind accounting in nature, right? Like you know that the forest, for example, or the mangrove is not going to be there forever. So people have questions about what happens when if the trees get cut down or there's a natural disaster. And these are really important questions that we need to be able to answer and have mechanisms to kind of protect against instances like that, to make sure that the nature-based solution is having the impact that we want to for the climate. And I think the best way to kind of advance or resolve that skepticism is really just continuously improving the science. Crediting programs have existed since the Kyoto Protocol in 1990 something, and even then they're using science, and the common practices in carbon markets today have changed a lot. So we just kind of have to embed that, I think, into the ethos of carbon markets, is continuous improvement to kind of resolve some of that skepticism and minimize the uncertainty that natural climate solutions have. But it's also really important, I think, to acknowledge that we'll never have 0% uncertainty. There'll always be some, and this is not really unique to nature either. I mean, I think that's an important message to convey, that when we're talking about implementing nature-based solutions, it's sometimes can be a trade-off between speed and uncertainty. We have the tools here today just to do natural climate solutions at scale. It's a very unique opportunity that doesn't exist across many parts of the sector that need to be decarbonized, and we need to act on it. So, minimizing uncertainty, but also maximizing speed, I think, is something that folks need to acknowledge if we're gonna, continue moving forward with NCS. And yeah, as you mentioned, I mean, the social inclusion aspect and Indigenous peoples, local communities is a huge part of natural climate solutions. It's not just about climate. We kind of categorize it as 3 pillars to NCS that are all kind of carrying equal weight. There's the climate impact, the sustainable development impact, and the kind of ecological biodiversity impact, that all need to kind of be in place to make sure that NCS is doing the job that it should be doing. And it's just a very unique opportunity, I think, that we can't afford to miss. So continuing that narrative, I think, of explaining why NCS is just so critical is really going to help incentivize and move things forward.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. Now, earlier you mentioned climate financing and its importance in this space and to Article 6. So, what strategies and mechanisms should be explored to close this ocean finance gap?
Mm-hmm. I'm an all solutions in kind of person, right? So as I say, carbon markets is not the only solution on the table. What we call in Article 6 non-market solutions is also a big topic of conversation. And I guess that really just points to philanthropy and figuring out, how do we mobilize money from the wealthier countries to areas that are underfunded. And so there's actually a provision within Article 6 called 6.8, and that focuses on non-market mechanisms or non-market opportunities that can help kind of finance options that are, or mitigation activities that are not really suitable for carbon accounting for one reason or another. And that's the way that they're doing that, which I think is kind of, it's a great kind of little system where they have a centralized hub of opportunities where, countries that want to seek finance for a certain type of project, but they're not interested in crediting, they can kind of meet up with the countries that are looking to contribute to another country's NDC. So again, this is like more philanthropic endeavors, but scaling those types of platforms and creating kind of a centralized place where you can see finance flowing. It doesn't have to be a market-based mechanism, but I think it's really important to keep building those tools to help with the finance gap issue.
Okay, so what else do you think might be contributing to the lack of funding in nature-based solutions?
I think it's a finance mobilization issue. That's why I emphasized earlier in the prior question, this importance of having a
Yes.
centralized, kind of systematized way of moving money around. Again, it doesn't have to be a market-based system to function efficiently and effectively. And this is where, 6.8 and many other, systems out there exist. We at TNC, we look a lot at RED, results-based payments, which are kind of looking at the jurisdictional scale, the national scale results that countries produce by decreasing deforestation, and they get payments in return for the kind of the impact that they have there. So we have lots of I guess lessons learned over the years through those types of programs that are getting funneled into 6.8. But yeah, I guess we'll see what comes out of the NCQG this year at COP to see if the money is there. I think there's also a question of political will, right, and countries' openness to kind of putting the money on the table, and then it's a question of where it goes. So that's also
Yeah,
a challenge.
definitely. Yes. So, would you have any recommendations for promoting ocean climate action, particularly amongst youth and indigenous peoples, but mostly just youth in general? And what would it be and why?
Hmm. It's a really good question. I think there's so many avenues, walking around COP29 today, I see a lot of young people. Some of them are, protesting and advocating, using their voices. Others of them are, starting up businesses like you are and really taking initiative and becoming young leaders, which I think is super, um, inspiring. The way that I see a lot of equity and inclusion of talking about Indigenous peoples and local communities in carbon projects. I think carbon markets is starting to do a better job of including those types of voices in the market. We in the voluntary space, for example, have started including these kind of dedicated groups of Indigenous advisors who can help weigh in on decisions around how the market gets shaped. I think there's a lot more that can be done there to kind of not just have them as advisors, but leaders in the space. So that's another thing that TNC tries to do a lot more of with IPLCs and our projects is kind of giving them the keys to the car and saying, okay, we have our technical services available to you. We're going to procure the finance, and then you'll tell us like how you want to design this project. So I think, civil society from that angle, we could do a lot more to basically bring Indigenous folks and more, groups who have less of a voice in carbon markets and in climate action right now, to really make some of more of the decisions that are pushing climate action forward.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, civil society, what can the broader ocean community like VOP and Island Innovation, what can we do to support parties to better incorporate ocean in national climate action? Do you have any specific examples?
Specific to ocean, I don't have specific examples there, but speaking more broadly from a nature context, a lot of what we do in talking to negotiators is bring them the science that they need to make an informed decision. In the case of Article 6, there's requirements, for example, on how to set a baseline and say, okay, this is how many emission reduction units were actually achieved compared to what would have happened. So yeah, civil society, TNC in particular, that's a lot of what the messaging is that we bring to COP and try and influence and bring kind of the objective case basically for why we need to keep moving forward with nature.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. We have discussed a lot so far, and the document in itself can be a challenging read, but I think you did a very good job in explaining it and simplifying it for the audience, and for myself as well. So thank you so much for taking out the time. Again, I have learned a lot, and hopefully later down in the week or after COP, we could have another interview to really discuss in its entirety the outcome of COP with regards to the ocean on Article 6. So thank you so much again.
We can do a before and after.
Yes, of course. That would be lovely.